Good day, everyone. Welcome to one of our bite-sized videos, of which the purpose is to bring you, the integrator, up to speed with some of the basic concepts surrounding the Flowgear integration experience, as well as take a brief dive into one of our popular use cases. We're going to start by exploring the screen in front of you, the Flowgear console, which is the very first thing you'll be greeted with after logging into Flowgear. The Flowgear console provides access to all the components relevant to your integrations. From here, you can navigate to spaces that facilitate the setup for different parts of the integration. The three primary spaces that I'd like to briefly touch on are the workflows, connections, and drop points. Workflows can be found by navigating to the workflow section over here. And workflows provide a canvas from which you can drag and drop connectors and tooling provided by the Flowgear platform and construct your integration according to your business rules. We will go more in depth around workflows once we start to explore the specific use case. Connections, which we can navigate to by clicking over here, are spaces with which you can provide credentials that allow you to authenticate and connect to the systems which you would like to integrate with. We can go ahead and click on the new button over here, and we can go ahead and select a particular connector to work with, and choosing any one of the connectors we can see here within the connector section, such as Connect, Rise, Manage. You'll see there's a space in which you can plug in credentials that are relevant to that specific platform. You then have the option of providing credentials for different profiles, such as test and production, and you will be able to run your workflow or integration within that profile, which will then target that specific environment that you've set up. If you set up your credentials correctly, you can click on the play button over here, which, if successful, will give you a green banner telling you that the test succeeded. Finally, we have the drop point section. The idea behind the drop points is that it is our solution to hybrid on-prem and cloud integrations. You can install the drop point agent onto your on-prem servers, which will allow us then to talk to those servers within the scope of what you allow us to do using the whitelisting features. This means that we can talk to your file systems, we can talk to your AD, or we can move data between CRMs and ERPs that are not exposed to the internet with the drop point. These three spaces are the most important aspects related to the integrations themselves within Flowgear. For a deeper dive into the elements that make up the Flowgear console, please see our bite-sized video focusing on navigating the Flowgear console. Next, we're going to take a deeper dive into workflows and nodes. To do this, we're going to navigate to the workflow section, which we have done by clicking on this workflow over here. And from there, we're going to open up a new workflow by clicking on the new button right over here, at which point we're given the option to name the workflow, which we can name it appropriately, and click on the OK button over here. At which point you are then greeted with the Flowgear design canvas, the purpose of which is to provide you with the space to drag and drop Flowgear tooling in a specific sequence and order to string it together and then form the basis of an integration from end to end. Now, to start dropping the tooling onto the canvas, we're going to click this plus icon over here, which is going to open up a list of our nodes. All of these little blocks are what we consider nodes, and simply put, a node is a function or set of functions that have been encapsulated in a certain way that the most complex aspects of it have been obscured from you, and only the parts that you have to interact with are exposed. Now, within our nodes, we have distinct categories, and the first category you can see here are the connectors. The connectors are responsible for talking to the systems with which you would like to integrate, and so all of the complexity around authenticating and talking to these platforms is hidden behind the node, and again, only the most relevant aspects of the node are exposed to you. Triggers are nodes that allow you to determine how a workflow should kick off. So it gives you architectural freedom around when a workflow should run and how it should run. In other words, if you would like a workflow to run twice daily or every 15 minutes, or perhaps on receiving a particular email, triggers will facilitate that process. Processes are the nodes that are responsible for actually supplementing, transforming, and enriching the data sets that you need to work with. So when you receive data from system A and needs to be transformed to a different structure so that system B can ingest it, the processes are there to facilitate that functionality, as well as implement further business rules that you may have necessary for your integration. And then finally, evaluators are the nodes that are going to have a look at the result of a transaction and allow you to kick off additional supporting logic within that workflow. In other words, should a transaction fail, does somebody need to be emailed? Does someone have to be informed in some way? Does a report have to be built? So on and so forth. These four categories encapsulate all the tools that Flowgear provides the integrator, allowing you to build both simple and complex integrations within the scope of a simplified experience. For this particular demo, we're going to be looking at the creation of accounts in Dynamics 365 Sales. We will be using Microsoft SQL Server as a data source. However, that is fairly inconsequential as the focus of this demo will be the use of the branded Dynamics 365 Sales connector. The first thing we're going to want to do is open up a brand new workflow by clicking on the new workflow button over here. We can then go and give that workflow a name, where we're then greeted with the Flowgear design canvas, where the expectation is to apply the appropriate nodes onto the canvas so that we can go ahead and build out this integration. Now, to kick that process off, we'll go and look for the appropriate nodes, starting with our Microsoft SQL query, which is going to facilitate the query of the data from the database. We're then going to go and look for Quick Map, which is effectively the tool that will be responsible for transforming those data sets from point to point. And then finally, we can go ahead and look for our 365 Sales connector, which is obviously responsible for creating those accounts. Now, at this point, we're going to go ahead and pick the connections that we want to use for this particular exercise. I've obviously pre-created these connections. However, if you were doing this, you would be doing this for the first time. And so what you'd have to do is go ahead and create a new connection, which will look a little bit something like this. You'll be expected to go and plug in credentials unique to that particular platform or product. So obviously, with respect to 365 specifically, we use app registrations as a form of authentication. And so you'll be expected to plug in your URL, client ID, and client secret. We do have a help article available for how you can actually generate these credentials. But once you've done so and plugged it in, you can actually test those credentials with a test connection button over here, where hopefully you'll get a green banner saying that you have in fact successfully authenticated. Now, with respect to our SQL environment, exactly the same thing. A totally different set of credentials obviously expected, but you can go ahead and plug those in, and then you can click on the test connection button there, and you'll also expect to have a green banner on that side. Once that's done, we can now go ahead and actually pick the particular actions we'd like to perform against these environments. Now, for SQL specifically, it is SQL, and so we're expected to write a statement. This particular node facilitates the exploration of the schema, as well as writing the statement from the canvas itself. We're simply going to go ahead and pick a top 10 from contacts. Now, what we can also do for SQL specifically is we can actually go to options and say, run this node in isolation. This is something you can do with any node, and it allows you to very iteratively test certain aspects of the integration. Now that we have a result on the activity log to see what is actually happening, we can click on that result and see that we did in fact get some data from the SQL environment. Now that's perfect. We're going to go ahead and make sure that the source of the quick map is aware of what is coming out of SQL. Now for Microsoft Dynamics specifically, we can go ahead and click on options and say choose sample. This is something that's supported with basically all of our branded connectors. And so what effectively is happening here is we are generating a list of potential actions that you can perform against that environment or that product using some mechanism that the vendor exposes. Could be an open API definition, it could be a SOAP definition, static documentation, whatever it is. Effectively for the user, you get to go to this point here where you can then look for something such as create account and click on that. At that point, you're actually going to see that we have now primed this node for creating an account. And we now have got a request XML, which is a sample of what that payload is going to look like. And what we want to do at this point is we want to make the quick map aware of what is expected for the target structure. So two things. One is we've abstracted complexity through the use of these connectors. Secondly, we were able to expose the list of available functions using our samples. And now we're going to make what is typically a difficult effort, such as mapping the data from point to point, a much simpler one through our quick map tool. So we can go ahead and click on change view, where we're then greeted with the two data structures or data trees, left hand, right. Left hand side is what's coming from SQL, right hand side is what's expected to go into the 365 sales environment. Now, the primary purpose of this tool is to give you an easy mechanism by which you can move data across from point to point. And so, for instance, if we go and search for name here and see what name fields are available, we can go ahead and look for the appropriate name field and drag across, for instance, first name here. We'll then also go and make sure that structurally each row is an account. And from there, we'll then see that we have got a list of accounts with their names in it, and the preview is showing us what that's going to look like as it goes into the environment for 365. Now, at this point, we'd go ahead and map all the relevant fields. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to a point where I've done so. So here you can see that we've now not only reduced the maximum number of fields that were available, but we've also gone and mapped the minimum mandatory fields to complete this transaction as a sales 365 sales transaction for account creation. So you'll see that I've mapped the fields from point to point. And now our preview, which you see on the right-hand side here, is a lot more complete with the fields that we need. You'll also notice that I included some functions inside of our filter expressions. So these functions allow you to take the data to a next level of complexity or enrich and supplement the data in whatever capacity you need to adhere to the rules of the target system. In this case, we have exposed functions that are very similarly modeled after Excel. And so we've done this for a reason. Excel is a very low barrier to entry for the most part. And so if you can think of sum, count, lookup, if statements, basically any math or string operation, you have the ability to expose that here and then obviously take that data to the next level. Now, instead of referencing cells, you're referencing fields, but ultimately you can see some of the application here where, first of all, I have trimmed my address for any white spaces, made sure that my postal code is a maximum of 5 characters. And in this case, I've combined the first and last names to make one single name inside of the name field. I've also just hard coded the actual country in this case, but ultimately it's things like that that you can expect to be able to use. So at this point, we can actually go ahead and close off the mapping. Then we're going to go ahead and hook up our execution flows from point to point. So this is just dictating which node needs to run after which node. And we can go ahead and test this entire integration from point to point. As we do so, we'll see the activity log pop up again, and this time it's going to show us the transaction and the results of the transaction for every single one of the nodes that executed. And so we can first of all take a look at the result of the SQL query, which should be the same as what we saw previously when we were generating some sample data. Now we can take a look at the the response for the quick map. As you click on a particular node, it will highlight that row over there. So we can have a look at that request. That was the output basically. Should be exactly the same as the preview that we saw. And then we can take a look at the actual response payload coming back from the 365 Sales API, which has got a status of true and a unique ID for all of these particular fields, which means that we did in fact create all those records. And so what I'll do at this point is I'll head back to my actual 365 Sales front end or dashboard, if you will. We'll take a look at our accounts and we can actually refresh this now, where we then expect to see all the new fields that we've just created right over here. We can tell that it's those fields because I never provided a phone number or anything like that for the accounts that we created in this particular case. So what this should represent then is the extract, transform, and load portion of any integration. It is obviously not production ready. You will need to add additional error handling and you will need to add additional business rules in order to take this particular solution to whatever production level vision you might have. Now, effectively, that's the core of what we wanted to show along with the usage of the actual node itself. So just a bit of a recap. What we showed you here was, first of all, abstraction of complexity through these pre-built connectors, such as the Dynamics connector, as well as the exposing of all of the potential actions using the samples. And then obviously simplifying certain efforts, such as mapping using the quick map. If you have to do anything else, which would then try and take this particular solution to production ready level, you could use some of the additional tooling here that we have on the canvas, which will allow you to add high level logic such as flow control, which will allow you to go ahead and determine what will happen if a failure occurs, handle certain errors, so on and so forth. The last few features I'd like to touch on are Enterprise API, revision, and release management. I'd like to show you where you can find those features and what they're all about. So as we start with Enterprise API, it is effectively the ability to turn any workflow into an API-bound endpoint. So to do this, you can head to the workflow settings on the top here. You can then navigate to the section that allows you to apply a binding, as well as a custom domain, which is set inside of your site settings, and then finally a custom path or URL, where this URL is then secured against an API key or a certificate and can be reached by any third-party application or program to pass data into or get data from Flowgear real time. The next feature I'd like to touch on then is revision management. You can find that feature by clicking on the revision history button over here. And ultimately what this is the ability to see when changes were made, who they were made by, and what those versions of the workflows look like. You can then open those versions of the workflows by clicking on the open button here for any particular version. We'll go to the very first one where we see there was actually nothing at that point. You can then choose to revert to this version if you would like to. The last feature I'd like to touch on is release management. You can find that feature by clicking on the promote workflow button over here. And what this brings up is a UI which allows you to merge your test into your UAT and eventually in production. Effectively, what this means is when a save is made, which I will do now, that save is not actually saved against the UAT or production environment until it's explicitly merged into that space. Now, you do not have to use this UI. The purpose of this particular feature is that it's actually backed, in this case, by GitHub, which provides you with a competent platform in which you can then run your change control policy that you've had up until this point. So if we open up this commit over here, we can find that it brings up the GitHub UI, which gives us an idea of what changed from then till now. From here, we can run a pull request or whatever it is that you've been doing up until now, and then obviously merge that into production. And that will then reflect inside of Flowgear here as a production-ready workflow. Now that we've shown you how to build a workflow, if at any point you have to go back and see what happened in that workflow, you can navigate to the workflow logs over here. For more detailed information on the topics we explored today, or if you would like to explore more complex aspects of the platform, including architecture and best practices, please join us for our technical certification course hosted on udemy.com. Also, go ahead and check out some of our other bite-sized videos for more common use cases and platform features. Also, please go ahead and visit our website where you can register for a free trial and complimentary proof of concept, have a look at our unique pricing model, or explore our list of over 200 pre-built connectors. Thank you very much for joining me for this short demo. Have a lovely day further.